Welcome everybody to Feel Good Friday. I'm your host, Trae Holiday, and I'm so glad you guys are with me on this Feel Good Friday. Welcome back. We took a bit of a hiatus as we did a bunch of traveling around Belize. So happy to have you guys with me today. And I have a really great Feel Good show for you. I got a good story that's all the way on its Feel Good vibes. And I also got Representative Jesse Johnson in the building. We're going to dive into all of the ways that all of that police reform that they did in the last legislative session is going to be hitting our airwaves, is going to be hitting the ground. There's a lot of work that gets into all of that. And so he's going to give us the details, all the scoop we need to know so that we can stay engaged and informed of the process as we ensure we hold our police even more accountable. So once again, thank you guys so much. And I hope you guys are enjoying your Friday thus far. I know I am. And I gotta say, this first story that I have, it's the story that I really want to spend a little bit of time on because I went to Howard University, so I spent lots of time in Washington, D.C. Salman's going to be putting the link for this story in the chat. It was a couple weeks old, but when I saw this hit me, I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I got to give some breath and actually give some time to this story as the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. goes digital. The great thing about it is that for all of you who are unable to travel all the way to Washington, D.C., you now have an opportunity to dive through the amazing art, the amazing exhibit, and the entire museum that is all about African American history. You guys that watch our Converge shows here, we care so much about the Black experience. And one of the things that I've heard so much about this museum is that it is all encompassing. There are floors upon floors of just beautiful information, historical context around our lived experience here in America as Black Americans. And honestly, the fact that this is something that is in DC, in our nation's capital, also for me really bodes a real sentiment, right? Because it's also saying that the nation is recognizing that history. And we've seen several things come out. We saw this whole 1619 report here in Washington. We have our own report around how all of the abuse and the harm that was caused, particularly to Black Americans and Black communities, needs to be absolved. And when we think about the ways that so many amazing groups and individuals are out there on the ground to really bring about Black liberation, it goes beyond my own, imagination about how beautiful it is to see this resurgence of so many people now understanding how are we going to atone for the atrocities of the past in this country. And so, this is truly feel good for me because even as we celebrate the history, we celebrate the resilience of Black brilliance, I think it's important that we also find ways to really be educated and informed. And the African American Museum is one of those ways where now you can digitally go on there, figure out, look through all of the archives, really spend time. So many people that I know that have visited the museum say this is not a one-day experience. This is a multi-day excursion. You got to give yourself some time to really soak it in. And in a couple of weeks, we'll be doing a recap on an event that happened last night right here in Seattle at the King Street Station. Salman and I got out there. And Mr. Daryl Richardson, that's my community uncle, he has an amazing exhibit, 1619, Remembrance, Resilience, Resistance, and Liberation. And it was amazing. He has spent so many years culminating these artifacts and all of the art and all of the history about not just the enslaved movement here in America, but the resistance that was embedded throughout all of it. And so I was inspired by going to that event last night and then seeing this story. And I thought, oh my goodness, the connection of how so many people are really saying, in order for us to really know what happened, we have to uncover some of these hard facts. We have to uncover some of this hard truth. And his exhibit is called The Unspoken Truth. So in a couple weeks, Salman and I will be pulling that segment together so that you guys can see it. The exhibit is up at King Street Station all the way until January 15th. So you guys have some time to go and soak that in as well. But again, if you're just saying, look, this Omicron variant is out there, I want to be in my house now. The African American Museum in Washington, D.C. has made it possible for you to enjoy the entire museum from the comfort of your home. Beautiful work to all the folks over there at the African American Museum. Thank you for making this entire museum even more accessible to all of us. I think a lot of people are still really weary about traveling, and rightfully so. So I'm glad to be able to report out to all of you that you guys can actually learn and get educated from the comforts of your home. So up next, you guys, I get to bring on Representative Jesse Johnson. You can go ahead and do that graphic there, Salman. But so glad to be able to dive in with Rep Johnson about all of the work that he's been doing with other legislators and other state reps around all of this police accountability and police reforms. You guys, you're watching Feel Good Friday. Stay tuned after this short break.
It's Gordon here on Converge Media, giving you that tea you didn't know you needed for Market Street Shoes over in Ballard. Check this out. Not only do they have great shoes for the summertime, but they have the shoes that you didn't even know you needed for the fall and winter. We all know it not only rains and snows a lot out here, so you definitely need those boots, but you also need a little bit of luggage, or at least a bag to put your clothes in, because let's be frank, we all love to get out of here during the fall and winter and go somewhere a little bit warmer. So whether you need accessories, shoes, or a little bit of luggage to jump on that plane, trust and believe Market Street Shoes has everything that you need. You just need to pull up and find it.
I did it for the city, I did it for the love, I did it for the people, I did it for us. Back on this rap-ish, I ain't even broke a sweat, homie, this practice. Pondering my next move, staring at my track list, hope I ain't miss my window. Praying like a Baptist, Seattle's own, tired of this Game of Thrones. They made a list of the best rappers, and guess who wasn't on? While the disrespect continues, I'm steady packing these venues.
Converge Media produces culturally relevant content for Black and urban audiences. Our coverage is raw, transparent, and objective, praised by community leaders, government officials, and residents. Support Converge Media today via Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal at Converge Media. Welcome back, everybody, to Feel Good Friday. I'm your host, Trae Holiday, and joining me now is the 30th District State Representative, Mr. Jesse Johnson. What's up, Jesse?
What's up? Nice to have you.
You need your mic.
Oh,
there we go.
Thank you so much.
Well, you know what? I got to say, I'm a resident of Federal Way, and you and I connected years ago when, you were on the council, and really you've been so committed to so much work out here. I want to just start a little bit about you. What got you saying, you know what? I think I have something to add to this political realm.
Well, really, I majored in political science, and I loved just learning about politics. I remember taking an urban politics class with Dr. Parker at UW, and Congressman Adam Smith was a big mentor of mine. But I think, it wasn't until 2017 after Donald Trump was elected, and I remember going to my employer at the time and seeing people were scared, immigrants, undocumented community, people of color. And I said, you know what, I got to get involved. I got to do something. And so a lot of folks around me said, you know what, you should run. You should run for city council. And so I decided to do it. And I've always been about if my family says go for it, then I'm gonna go for it. And this is about we, not me. So decided to run and got involved. And I think for me, if I can stay true to my values and speak truth about the world around us and really stay balanced on tough issues, then I should remain in politics and still, continue to push for reform. So that's what I'm about.
Yeah. And I mean, then clearly, you said, okay, look, there's an opportunity right here to run for state rep, which we understand there's so much work behind each one of these campaigns. What was it that you said, you know what, okay, from the city level, now I got to take all of my energy to the state?
Well, honestly, I did not think I was going to be running for no state politics, but from the city level, like obviously you have an impact on your local community, but I was just seeing the same issues in every single jurisdiction around me. So the same issues we have in Federal Way or in Kent or in Auburn, Renton, Seattle, and we got to take this statewide. And so in 2020, decided to put my name in the hat for an appointment and was able to get on board and then run in 2020. But it was just honestly, like I just wanted to take what we were doing in Federal Way to the state level.
Yeah, and thank you so much for it. I think, so many people have talked about how that last legislative session was historic, right? We had record numbers of Black representation. I know the Black Members Caucus was just strong. And also the opening up because of COVID and all of the adjustments we've had to make, it meant that more and more people got engaged in the process. Can you talk a little bit about how you dealt with all of the elements of that legislative session?
Well, last year, I mean, the political moment was really ridiculous because we had obviously the pandemic where we couldn't grassroots campaign like I did in 2017. But we also had obviously George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, locally with Manny Ellis. We had police violence and people were amped up and like, we need to change the system. And then we had people that were, trying to suppress the vote from a different standpoint. So I think, we had all these things. So I think it got to the point where, for me at least, I had to engage all these different folks and coalition build in Federal Way. And I wanted to just make sure that everybody's voice was heard in the process. And that's part of who I am as a person, is like everyone around me. I want to hear from you. I want to know your issues. What can I do to support? And 2020 became one of those years where the momentum was there to, especially on police reform, to make sure that we had changes in our system, but also really to just show that we're here as a community, as Black and brown people. We're here, we're in elected office, and we're working together. And we're not like, trying to do anything that's going to take away from anybody else. We're just trying to get more for our community, make sure our community is represented.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And, sometimes there is a muddlement of the message, right, and the narrative, particularly when it comes to all of the people getting out in the streets. And, you have certain folks characterizing it as riots. And we talk about that all the time here on Converge, that there was really a difference. And we want to make that distinction because there was people that were utilizing their First Amendment right to get out there, freedom of speech, utilize that. But also there was really a full-fledged of peaceful protesting that was happening in Seattle. And I think that you're right in terms of the essence of the time, all kind of coming together to say, wait a minute, even as these people were peacefully protesting, we saw such a energy coming from the police force as if everybody were rioters, right? And so I've talked to different attorneys that have been working with some of the protesters, and some of the things that they were putting on folks is really ridiculous. And so I think, when you talk about this kind of this zeitgeist, right, of the times we're in, it was required to do something different for police reform. But I want you to be able to also speak to the fact that this isn't something just you get to go in there and champion. This has to be a measure of collective energy and power to say we need to do something. How were you able to make those connections that were possible for us to even see some of those police reform bills come into play?
Well, I mean, I always remember the fact that I'm just a person like everyone else. And I think, we often have the lived experience before we have the language for that experience. And so I remember being 5 years old, seeing my dad pulled over on 520 Bridge and for mistaken identity for a stolen car based on reasonable suspicion, guns drawn, the full deal. And seeing that at 5 years old, like that has a traumatic impact on your whole life. And to think like if something would have happened, my whole trajectory in life could have changed without having a father figure. So I remember that. And so when I get into policy now, I'm like, I want to hear those folks that are on the ground. What's their lived experience? What's happening with them? And this is not an attack on police or even, I've heard this getting conflated, defund the police accountability. It's not about defunding the police or reducing their budget or even changing their capacity to respond to crime. This is about the rules of engagement. Once they get to that situation, how are you going to de-escalate? How are you going to prioritize less lethal enforcement and make sure that, you're trying to figure out and investigate the situation, not attack people on the ground?
Yeah, that's really important to make the distinction. And I agree with you. And that's why it's so important, for media outlets like this, because I think we have to be able to give space to really identify what it is we're talking about here so that people out there really can understand all of the work that is required and what it is that is being reformed, right? Again, because this is a new territory. And so as you were out there in the legislative session, I think there was people kept saying there was a massive amounts of like kind of acceptance of the fact that there was a need for change, which also helped for this last legislative session to be historic. But for you, it was like one of your first legislative sessions, so it meant a lot. How has that impacted you thus far? Because now you're getting ready to go into your next legislative session, and at this point now it's about actualizing all of the reforms that we got passed.
Yeah, and kind of going back, like at the time, it was right before all of our, elected officials of color had gotten elected in 2020. So this was the summer right after the protests, and the community came to me and said, "We want a Black legislator pushing these bills." And so myself and Rep. Intamin, we were able to kind of work together, figure out which bills we were going to work on. And I wanted to make sure that the people's voice was heard. So when we're talking about banning chokeholds, no-knock warrants, like these are policies that are rooted in racism, rooted against people of color, and we just never have done anything about it in Washington State. And it's pretty remarkable to see that in 2021, this is the first time we're changing, kind of comprehensively changing our police system. And it took that long, but all these decades of people of color showing up to Olympia, to city council meetings across the state saying we need change. And finally, we kind of had, with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we kind of had like the moment there, that session. And the momentum has decreased. I'll be honest, like right now, there is an uptick in police violence, but also an uptick in crime and violence and gun shootings. Like I see it in Federal Way. And, the reality is there can be two things true at the same time. We can have both a need for police accountability and a need to address the root causes of crime. And we don't need to say we have to do one or the other. We can do both. And we don't have to just accept things as the way they are. And so that's my mentality going into 2021, not only implementing the bills, but also saying, yes, we see other issues, economic issues, socioeconomic root causes that we need to address as well. We need to invest in community-based organizations. We need to also invest in police training. So I'm not about saying police need to be stripped of their budget. I'm saying you all need to do the right thing in your job and make sure that there's accountability.
Yeah, and for me, I think that the combination of the legislation that did get passed really sets a new marker in terms of how we're holding our police force accountable, and also how we're allowing for their actions to stay with them, which I think is really important when you do talk about the fact that there's great police out there. Okay, great. Yes. The institution of policing is where community comes in, because they're saying, look, we can have great individuals, but those individuals are part of an institution that is rooted in racist practices. And so how do we do something different to identify what those practices are and uproot them out of the institution of policing? And I know there's a huge push from community with regard to, hey, we need community oversight. We also need to be able to relieve the police of certain calls so that those things can come into community, particularly around mental health cases, which we have seen actually have not played out so well. We just saw the settlement of Charlena Lyles, right? Murder of, from the police. And when you're talking about people that are dealing with mental health crises, it is very different than somebody who's violently trying to attack the police. How are the reforms really speaking to that so that we can make those distinctions as well?
Yeah, that's a great point. And before we started on these reforms, when I was on city council, I took ride-alongs with police. I talked with law enforcement. And what I found, a lot of it is rooted in fear. And this, they're just like us as regular people. They have biases, and they feel like sometimes like community is against them. And the reality is, what I was trying to tell them in these encounters is like, police, like you all are just one of the institutions in this world, but you're also an institution with a badge and a gun. The only institution with state sanctioned, you can have, you can kill someone. And I think, you know, a lot of times they kind of forget that, especially because a lot of our police come out of the military. Right here in Washington State, over 60% of our police are ex-military. So you're coming out of dire situations where you're having to make split-second decisions based on life and death, and then going right into the community. It doesn't even make sense, right? And so I think, you know, a lot of times going back to the training, they need to understand cognitive dissonance, and you know, understand cultural relevancy, and understand our communities that they're serving, because this is like, you know, these are people's lives that are in their hands. And so I say that to say, like, when I talk with a community on the other end, I have to be consistent, and I have to say, okay, you know, we have to also start to address some of these issues within our own community before it gets to the point where, you know, our kids are out at 2 a.m. shooting each other, and now the police are responding, and who knows what's going to happen. So we have to have accountability on both ends. But I will say, like, I think we're getting there. I think this year was a turning point because we brought police and community to the table together. And we had, you know, I would say days and weeks of Zoom meetings together, talking about these issues. The Washington Coalition on Police Accountability, shout out to them. They were amazing. The impacted families that spoke. Katrina Johnson, the cousin of Charlene Lyles, one of those families that just spoke out like, this is our experience. What's your experience, police? And they would do the same. And we talked through it. Of course, there was never really consensus, but there was at least collaboration. Like, we could talk to one another about the different perspectives we had. And that's why I'm so surprised, honestly, about a lot of the police pushback, because they're saying, oh, we were not involved, or we were blindsided. No, it's not true. They were there every step of the way. The problem is they just didn't agree with our solutions, and we passed the solutions. So I think, you know, now we're going into 2022 where, you know, we need to implement these solutions, and we have to do it in a way that makes sense. Going back to your point about different people responding. So House Bill 1310 basically said, instead of having police show up to every crime, we need to have designated crisis responders, mental health professionals coming to those situations with police. And if it rises to a level of an imminent threat, then police can step in. But don't just go right in, guns blazing, to any households anymore. We can't have that. A lot of the calls they respond to are domestic violence, for example, aggravated assault, but they don't know the situation they're walking into. They don't know the dynamics. And then as soon as they see someone hop up the couch too quick or look like they have a gun, they're going to respond in that militaristic mentality. And so it makes sense why these things happen. And that's why it's our jobs as policymakers to eliminate those situations. We need to have mental health folks as first responders and the police there only as backup when they need to come in.
Yeah, I think that that's a great way to deal with it, and also to ensure that kind of both ends are being met. And I know that that is got to be difficult in terms of like trying to make all the ends meet, because it seems very polarizing in community. Oftentimes it's an us versus them mentality, and the only way that we can eradicate all of this is to get away from that kind of thinking and to understand that if we start working collaboratively and collectively, we can actually see the outcomes we are looking for. That brings me kind of to another point here, because, you know, you're talking about, you know, how there's this, you know, pushback, right, from the police. And in Federal Way, I was experiencing it from a community perspective, right? As they were looking at, okay, we need community oversight of policing. It was something that was it had hit city council. And so many people were on the call saying, you know, we need to leave our police alone. We actually need more police. And Federal Way has a pretty large police force in terms of the statistics at a state level. If you look at different cities, Federal Way has quite a large police force. So it's interesting that there's still this understanding that there's almost two sides of this coin, where those who have not really been affected by the some of the missteps of policing, right, whatever they may be, some of those folks that haven't seen that are still like, hey, you know, our boys in blue. How do we merge these two things? Because I think it's really important for those who are on either side to kind of understand that right now the approach that's being taken is not so much of a middle ground, but it is new for everyone. And so there's got to be some level of comfortability, I guess, for both sides in terms of how to bring it all together. I don't know if you have any answer to that, but it feels like that's what I'm experiencing as a community member.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think a couple of things. Well, first, you know, a lot of the violence we're seeing is based on socioeconomic, you know, urban inequality leads to violence. And I talked to our Federal Way chief, and he talks about domestic violence and theft, the two biggest things they respond to. And a lot of times, police's solution to those issues is just to go in, like I said, with this idea that somebody needs to go to jail. And the reality is that needs to change, because when you strip the family unit of someone, regardless of what's happening in the situation, it tends to lead to more damage, and then you have more issues going on. And so I think we need to look at it from a comprehensive perspective and bring in not only the police institutions, mental health, behavioral health, but also the families and the youth and our community itself to the table. And that's why Federal Way, we were pushing for community oversight boards, so we could have community there at the table in direct partnership with police to talk about complaints, to talk about issues going on in the community. And it's not an attack on police. This is just about trying to get to solutions. Ultimately, we want the best policies for our community, because again, it doesn't help anyone when we have violence from police or from community. Violence, leads to more violence. And so I think, helping the police to understand that is a big part of the process. But we also have a lot of community members that still rely on the fact that our police are our guardians, right? Maybe not myself and you, we may not think that because of our own experiences, but a lot of people believe they're our guardians. They're going to stop crime. And even police have said, we respond to crime after the crime has already occurred. Yeah. We have a hard time actually stopping crime. That's going to have to be community. We're going to have to invest in community-based organizations, invest in institutions that help lead to prevention and diversion for these folks getting into the crime itself. But I think, again, we have to come to the table and talk about these issues in a time where political tensions are high. And that's one of the big issues is politically, it's dangerous to kind of be on that middle road. People are like, I'm all about police, back to Blue Lives Matter, or I'm all about defund the police and police abolition and all this. I'm like, can we find a common ground here and like figure this out? Because these two sides, it's not going to work. I mean, it's just going to lead to more people being upset.
That's exactly what I'm experiencing, right? As a community, I'm saying, even in the work I do, I understand the need for, and this is something I firmly believe in, is really amplifying community solutions. I also think in terms of educating the other side about what that looks like. And it doesn't mean that, police are, this is just all horrible. I have my own opinions about it, right? But I think that certain folks, if they're more educated and really in maybe like smaller info sessions where they understand how we're going to transition out of the system of policing that we have right now, I think it's important. And one of the things I gotta mention here as we're talking about policing is the fact that a lot of times we realize that it's not the police themselves. Again, we have to talk about the institution. We have to talk about the fact that there are people that get money for jailing people. And this is why our country has the most folks in prison across the board. We have to start thinking about that and really, I think, uprooting the fact that that's where we're at when we talk about police out there that have a quota for the tickets they need to write. I mean, this is right, Jesse. I mean, this is really the truth, so I wonder, as we think about this reimagining and as we kind of move forward and really that amazing package of police reforms is now going to be actualized. How are we thinking about those top level things that really trickle down in ways that hurt communities, particularly communities of the global majority?
Yeah, I think about it in a way, like I'm an educator. So I think about in schools, we call it multi-tiered systems of support. So every layer, there needs to be a layer for students and another layer for students, depending on their level of grief or trauma or whatever's going on. Same with community. Like we can't have the same way of policing in Redmond or Issaquah as we do in Federal Way. It's just an entirely different context. I was talking to Representative Goodman about this, who's the chair of public safety. He said they had zero pursuit policies in Redmond and Kirkland and Issaquah, which means police don't chase for anything because there's not really a lot of things to chase for. But then when you have that same policy in Federal Way and Kent and Auburn, it looks different. And so I think, we have to get to the point where we're talking about context and not just the content of the legislation we're passing, but how is this going to look in different communities? So we passed this legislation, right? But now it's like, we need to work with our local mayors and city councils. Like, how are you going to implement this in your own community? Like the bill is law. It's law now. So you defying it makes no sense. Like, this is what the people passed. And it's not just me. This is, 100 and something legislators that passed these bills, community that testified in support. And so now it's about, okay, how are you going to implement it? And I think so many of our elected officials are still stuck on, well, I don't like this, so I'm going to push back on it. And we're wasting time, while in the meantime, there's still stuff happening in community. There's crimes going up. We need to look at how we're going to implement it and look at the root causes of the crime again. And to your point, like, I think like a lot of the issues that at least I face in the legislature are too many people that are, how do you say, kind of just like indifferent or complicit, and not enough people that are bold, like with a sense of urgency. We need to do something about this. And that's what was different about 2020, is we finally came together and said, we need to do something around police accountability. But we need to have that same energy going towards economic justice, going towards our young people that are basically acting out and saying, we need help, we need support. Like, you guys have been ignoring us for a year during this pandemic. We're unsocialized, getting thrown back in schools. What do you expect? A fight's going to happen. Things are going to happen. And so I think we need to get to those same issues with that same energy that we had with the police accountability work. And across the board, things need to change.
Yeah, I love how you just layered it there with a multi-tiered approach, which I think is so appropriate, honestly, particularly when we're talking about how we support communities and how we educate those who understand the need for that level of support. It is something that it is like, it's so polarizing, in community. And we've been talking about just how COVID and the vaccine is polarizing. I mean, why does everything have to become so polarizing and politicized, like highly energetic with that kind of political energy, or polarizing energy all at the same time? And I think we are really dealing with such a convergence of a multitude of things when we talk about how this pandemic has economically impacted global majority communities, how, we're still dealing with the fact of rise in gun violence, which is so key to all of these reforms. As you think about the implementation, how are you also being able to still center that community rooted approach in the implementation? Because, we just talked about it the other day, how, Mayor Jim Farrell was saying, hey, there needs to be a approach to this violence. We need these people. And we're like, wait a minute, it already exists in a regional approach. Like, there's an amazing effort happening right now that is saying we need to bring together all of the mayors, the police chiefs, the community, the advocates, those who are the divergent specialists. We need to bring everybody to the table to really drum up new solutions for how we're going to attack these issues. And also empower community, because you are right. Police respond to crime. And I love how you put that out there. It's not as if they're actually stopping it, but when we have thriving communities like Redmond, Issaquah, all of that, when we talk Medina, right? It's very different. And it goes back to the fact that we have to actually think about how we're empowering people to really live life in an abundant way. And so I see it as such a multi-pronged approach, which is why I love the work I do as well, and love this work in terms of getting the information out there. How can communities stay engaged and involved in this process?
That was a great question. And I think one of the things, at least I've learned in this pandemic, is we rely on everyone else. Like, if one person doesn't do something right, look what happens. And the entire country is affected by it. And if we don't have leaders in office that are ready to address this with that sense of urgency, things go downhill. And so I think, a couple of things that we need to accept: we have flawed institutions. A lot of people don't like to accept the fact that we have flawed institutions. America is a experiment. Democracy is an experiment. Capitalism is an experiment. These are not things that are just set in stone, workable, and are perfect. They have flaws. And so we have to fix those flaws as time goes on. And we're in one of those moments where we have that opportunity, because I think the broad public is finally seeing through the pandemic, yes, we have a lot of flaws in our system. and we need to figure these out. But it takes, again, when will elected leaders finally accept that the answers are actually in the community, and accept the fact that you can say, I don't know. You don't have to become a politician and suddenly think you know everything. Like, I say, I don't know all the time. I want community to help me out because I just don't know the answer. But too many of our elected officials are just like, we have to figure this out in our own like isolated, circle. No, we need to go out into the community and bring them in and say, what can we do about this problem? And that's one of the things I'm hoping to do this year, not only with implementation, but with all of the issues. And finally, also like Washington State sees itself as a progressive state, but in so many ways, like look at our gun policies. One of the easiest access to guns in the country in our gun policies. Look at how we deal with, education. We do not have an education system that services our Black and brown students well. All of these issues, but we say we're a progressive state. We need to accept the fact that we have flaws in our state. We're not a leader. We have to become that leader through our community and bring them in to find the solutions.
Yeah, and you're just 100% right on that. And this is leads me to my very next question around the apathy that community members actually are experiencing. You have people that are in single parent households. They got 3 jobs. They're catching the bus from one thing to another. They're trying to figure out childcare. They're working to just live. We have a lot of folks that are stuck in survivor mode, unfortunately, and really due to the high cost of living here throughout the state of Washington. And I am always like, I've talked to people, my family, my friends, even just community members about how important it is that they be engaged and informed. But we just saw in the last local election a really low turnout once again. And it goes to the point of, if we really want to do something, we have to do something. Like, it's on us to do something. What kind of thoughts do you have around permeating that apathy that is so experienced in community?
Yes, that is a fantastic question. I think, like, for me at least, what it looks like is saying, okay, we have a system that has done, its job a certain way for a long time. And look where it's gotten us. We have, some of the highest, unregulated housing markets where housing costs are going through the roof. We have people that, the majority of our cities are renters. And when we talk about housing justice, it's not just renters, but it's also how do we create opportunities for home ownership that creates generational wealth for our communities. We still have a system that does not have affirmative action, which a lot of people believe, leads to more Black and brown people getting a handout when it's really a hand up because of the systems that have plagued our communities for so long and held us down. And so, some of these basic things, and we have to get that right first. But then we have to also accept the fact that communities are not monolithic. So the Black community is not all the same. The Asian community, the Latinx community, they have differences of opinion as well. Because sometimes I hear with my colleagues like, oh, well, Black Lives Matter said this, but, Build Back Black said this. And it's like, we're not monolithic. We can have differences of opinion. It doesn't mean that, we're not going to pass something because you're saying that because the Black community is not, in alignment. No, like, people have differences of opinion. That's okay. We have to bring them to the table and figure out the best policy. Maybe it's somewhere in between what the different groups are saying. You know what I mean? So I'm really like trying to bring that attitude. And I know that's just my way of thinking, and I don't, hold it against another politician for thinking differently, but bring folks to the table, collaborate, coalition build relationships within your own community first, bring them to the table, bring them to Olympia. We now have virtual testimony for the first time, which is crazy with all the technology. Last year was the first time someone did not have to drive an hour to Olympia to testify on a bill. You can now do it online. And so, things like that, we're finally, politics is always behind in technology, but we're finally looking at what's going on and saying, this is not equitable. This is not just, and we're changing it. So I think, we're getting there, but, my biggest fear is the political, like, people not embracing data and evidence and being irrational right now. Like, I'm seeing so much irrational talking on social media, like, this is the way it has to be. Well, I mean, if we're not able to have a conversation with you, if your mind's made up, what's the point of even talking about it, and so many people venting rather than trying to be a solution builder. And so I think we need to get to the point where everyone, elected officials, community, gets to the point where they actually want to solve issues, not just talk about why they don't like the way things are.
Agreed. And, me and Omari, we say it all the time, particularly around voting, that you can't complain if you don't participate, right? And I agree wholeheartedly. And I also understand when people just say, I don't have the time, and but now it's more easily accessible, as you just mentioned, the digitization of the process, allowing people to be more engaged. And I remember having a great conversation with Kirsten Harris Talley, and she was saying, Representative Talley, and she was saying, look, now is the time for our people to realize that their voice is super important. And because it is so easy, there's a way for them to be engaged without it causing a huge burden on them or on their time or whatever else, right? Not needing to get childcare. Hey, do it right there. The baby is crying, we're still going to hear your testimony, Absolutely. Right? I mean, all of that stuff is important. And I think for me, one of the things that I really see as a bridge builder to this is literally encouraging communities, right? I think about all of the apartment complexes out there in Federal Way. And many of you who know me, you've heard me talk about this, that nobody ever knocked on my door and living in an apartment to say, hey, what is your issue? And I want you to vote for me. Like the connection again. And I get it. We're in a pandemic. Let's mask up. Let's get information sessions happening, maybe even digitally for micro communities. Maybe it starts in one apartment complex and it permeates. But the idea is that not enough people are doing that are engaged and informed to bring that information into community. I think is another way that you can say this is exactly what it looks like when you are engaged, right? It looks like this passing of this amazing police package. And because we are leading in the nation with it, I think it's a great example of collective power. And I go back to, the people in power are never as powerful as the people, right? Those ideas around collective power, which help to push this through. What are some of the last things you want to make sure our audience hears today? Because this has just been a great interview. I'm sure I could talk to you for many, many hours, but, I believe in representation, and I'm thankful that you're representing us well. I've heard nothing but great things about your approach, your genuine nature, and your care for the community. You bring that into the work you do. What is it you want our audience to make sure they know so that they stay engaged and make sure, hey, in their communities, they're utilizing the knowledge around this police package and these reforms to be engaged in the process to ensure that accountability is also happening on their turf?
I think you said the word knowledge, right? I tell young folks all the time, like, know your issues, know your rights. When a police officer stops you, a lot of folks don't know, but you can literally ask the question, are you detaining me? Because if they're not detaining you, or if they're not, trying to investigate a crime and identify you as a suspect, you can walk away. Now, then it gets to the point where what's going to happen if I walk away, right? And for our community, that looks different than other communities. Yeah. So even when people tell me that, I'm like, I don't know. So, but know your information, know your rights. And then you can use that as a tool. So when people are saying, well, this police bill does this or that, well, HB 1054, HB 1310, these are the bill numbers. Like, what does it actually say? Because there's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of stuff that law enforcement representatives are sending out into the space that are just not facts. And what do the bills actually do? And the second thing is voting is the first step in your political activism process, but also holding your elected officials accountable is just as important. What did they say on the campaign trail? Are they doing what they said that they would do? And are you holding your elected officials accountable? If they don't respond via email or a call, that's a problem. Like, one of our number one jobs, like, I talk with my legislative assistant all the time, like, who emailed me today? What's going on? I need to respond, because it's so important that people feel like they're being heard and being listened to. So again, representation is about all of that and above, but the knowledge part, like, how do we get our community to be equipped with knowledge? Like you said, it's kind of on me as an elected official to go to the community, go to the apartment complexes, the community centers, the churches, wherever we congregate, to provide that information. And then it's on the community's job to hold our systems accountable once that information is given to them. When you have information, that's power, but you have to be able to hold systems accountable. and doing so through testifying, through communicating with your elected officials. That's so important because we hear it when we're kids, but you don't ask, you don't get fed. You know what I mean? And the loudest voices get what they want. And when I go to these city council meetings in the past, when I was growing up, there'd always be like the same 50 people, and they would get what they want. Yeah. And then I noticed, like, once we started showing up, like, we were starting to get what we wanted too. So, I think just showing up, I know it's tough because people are trying to survive, but who has the ability within your circle to be that communicator, that messenger, and who has the ability to be active in the process and to be there. But I just want to leave you with that. And I think, this has been a great interview. I could talk forever as well. This is awesome, but I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Representative Johnson, man, doing it for the people. Thank you so much for coming down here to Converge, being with me on Feel Good Friday. It's definitely felt great. And I appreciate me being even more engaged and informed on these bills. You can best believe you'll probably be getting an email from me to make sure I know what I need to be doing to hold you accountable and to also do my part as an active community member. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. You guys, I am so inspired. I hope you guys are inspired. You guys know I love inspiration all day, every day. Representative Johnson just showed up so well for us. We got just one more break, and then we're going to come back and give you a little bit more Feel Good Friday energy with some events happening this weekend. Stay tuned, you guys. You're watching Feel Good Friday.
I did it for the city, I did it for the love, I did it for the people, I did it for us. Back on this rap-ish, I ain't even broke a sweat, homie, this practice. Pondering my next move, staring at my track list, hope I ain't miss my window. Praying like a Baptist, Seattle's own, tired of this Game of Thrones. They made a list of the best rappers, and guess who wasn't on? While the disrespect continues, I'm steady packing these venues.
Converge Media produces culturally relevant content for Black and urban audiences. Our coverage is raw, transparent, and objective, praised by community leaders, government officials, and residents. Support Converge Media today via Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal at Converge Media. Welcome back, everybody, to Feel Good Friday. I'm your host, Trae Holiday, and it has definitely been a Feel Good Friday over here. I really hope that you guys are feeling the feel good energy that we are feeling over here. Great interview with Representative Jesse Johnson today, and I am excited because we got some great events also happening this weekend. You guys know I gotta make sure we put our guys in here Saturday at 10 p.m. You guys can catch Weird at Night. They're going to be doing some weird things as always, and they're right here on Converge Media. So wherever you're seeing this stream, you guys can catch them on Saturday night at 10 p.m. And you know what, you guys, I'm going to send this message to you because we're still waiting on my appearance on Weird at Night. I'm ready to get weird with y'all and make sure that, we're combining our Converge energies for all the weirdness. I'm ready for it. Also, our great partners over there at Friends at the Waterfront. We love all the work that they're doing and the events that they're putting up there. Salman is putting a couple of links in the chat. This weekend, they have several events coming up, and tomorrow on Saturday, they're having a birds watching event. You can do a 30-minute session where you'll learn about all of the birds that are specific to the Pacific Northwest, particularly in this season. And one of the things I gotta say about bird watching, if you've never watched birds, okay? We're down here in Pioneer Square. I get to watch birds all the time. Birds have such a unique characteristics to them. I mean, if you watch some seagulls fighting over a slice of cold pizza on the ground, and then they get into a battle, and then the pigeons come up because they're like, oh, they're over there fighting. Let's get on with this crust. Let me tell you, it is a whole vibe, okay? I sat and I watch birds because I think crows are they're the smartest birds. But I really enjoy birds. You guys, if you're interested and looking to kind of learn a little bit more, please check out this event happening tomorrow. You guys can do 30-minute sessions and learn from some experts about the amazing species of birds that are out here in the Pacific Northwest, and also be able to catch them. So they said, please bring your binoculars if you have them. They will have a couple on site as well if you do not. And then Sunday, they are doing Indigenous storytelling time. They're going to have 3 amazing Indigenous storytellers bringing you some great stories. And as we've been talking about here, the more engaged we are, the more informed we are about all the cultures around us, the history around us, we actually are able to walk with our shoulders up a little bit more, and also be more compassionate to other ethnicities and cultures that are around us. We understand that we are on Indigenous land. So I love that they're going to have Indigenous storytellers out there on Sunday. So a couple of events from our friends over there at Friends at the Waterfront. Again, these events are happening at Pier 62. Let me tell you, they have activated the pier all the way, and you guys have an opportunity to engage with all of the amazing energy and activity that's happening right there at Pier 62. Shout out to you guys at Friends at the Waterfront. We appreciate you guys for keeping it popping at the pier. And that's it for me today, you guys. I think that's all of we got Truly Unruly. I want to make sure I put that out there too. Truly Unruly is on Sunday at 7 p.m. right here on Converge Media. Again, you guys, for me, always, we saw it today in the interview I just did with Representative Jesse Johnson. He has seen himself as a part of the solution by being engaged, by taking his energy from the local level of the city council and Federal Way to the state level. And again, hoping that you all join in with him as he pushes all of this legislation forward. We needed to be active in our communities, and that means that we need to be engaged in the process. So I encourage you guys to be engaged. And as he said, hold him accountable, hold all of your elected officials accountable, send them emails, call them up, let them know your lived experience so that they can take it in when they're in these sessions. They need to have our voices at the table. So I hope you guys are inspired to see yourself as a part of the solution, as Representative Jesse Johnson has, and as I try to do all the time. Thank you guys so much for watching this amazing Feel Good Friday. Until next Friday, be well. Peace.